Hey everyone, this is Karenology. You won't believe the insane drama that just unfolded. Let's get into it. I woke up to the sound of my car alarm blaring in the driveway. My heart pounded as I rushed outside, my feet barely touching the ground, already fearing the worst. The moment I laid eyes on my car, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. Deep, jagged scratches ran across the entire length of the vehicle, like someone had taken a knife and carved their frustration into the paint. My breath caught in my throat as I ran my fingers along the damage. I already knew who was behind this, but that didn't make the sight any easier to process. I turned my head sharply toward the house next door, where Tom stood on his porch, casually sipping his coffee. He leaned against the wooden railing, his body relaxed, an amused smirk barely concealed behind the rim of his cup. He was watching me, waiting for my reaction, feeding off my anger like a parasite that thrived on misery. "Rough morning, neighbor," he called out, his voice thick with fake sympathy, though the sparkle in his eyes betrayed him. He was enjoying this. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails bit into my palms. The trash on my lawn, the blaring music at all hours, the constant shouting, the driveway being blocked deliberately, all of it had escalated to this. Tom wasn't just an inconsiderate neighbor. He was a menace, and he knew exactly what he was doing. I took a step forward, fury burning in my chest. "You think this is funny, Tom?" I gestured sharply to my car, my voice coming out harsher than I intended. "You did this, didn't you?" Tom took another leisurely sip of his coffee before shrugging. "You got any proof of that?" "Might want to be careful with accusations, buddy. Homeowner Association wouldn't like you causing a scene." Homeowner Association. That damned Homeowner Association. The very organization that was supposed to keep the neighborhood in order had instead become my worst nightmare. Every time I complained about Tom, I was met with the same automated response. "We'll investigate the matter." But no action was ever taken. Meanwhile, I was drowning in fines for ridiculous infractions. Left my garbage bins out a few hours too long? Fine. Grass an inch higher than the acceptable standard? Another fine. But Tom, he could throw all-night parties, leave beer cans littering the sidewalks, and park on other people's driveways with absolute impunity. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Losing my temper wouldn't get me anywhere. "You don't belong here, Tom. You don't own that house. You're renting. You don't even follow homeowner association rules." Tom let out a laugh, shaking his head as if I had said the funniest thing in the world. "I belong here as much as you do. Maybe even more, considering how much fun I'm having." And that was the moment it hit me. This wasn't random. This wasn't just some inconsiderate neighbor making my life miserable for sport. This was calculated. I had heard whispers before, rumors of homeowners being harassed, pressured, and bullied until they finally gave up and sold their properties. I had brushed it off as exaggerated paranoia, the kind of conspiracy nonsense that spread on online forums. But now, standing in front of Tom, seeing the gleam of amusement in his eyes, it all clicked into place. He wanted me to leave. Someone wanted me to leave. I felt the weight of realization settle on my shoulders. Tom had moved in just a few months ago, right after Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman who had lived here for decades, had suddenly decided to rent out her home while she traveled. It had never made sense to me. She was proud of her garden, loved chatting with neighbors. It wasn't like her to just pick up and leave. And then there was Karen, the homeowner association accountant who held more power than the actual homeowner association president. She had been the one to issue nearly all of my fines. She always had a reason why Tom's behavior couldn't be addressed, why my complaints were unfounded. It was like she was protecting him. I needed proof. If this was a setup, I wasn't going to let myself be the next victim. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I got to work. I installed security cameras around my property, every angle covered. If Tom was going to keep pushing me, I would be ready. If homeowner association wasn't going to do their job, I would do it for them. As I locked my front door that night, a new feeling settled over me. Determination. This wasn't just about a bad neighbor anymore. This was about my home, my right to live peacefully. And if Tom and whoever was behind him thought they could force me out, they were in for a fight. But deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be easy. Tom wasn't just some pawn. He was part of something bigger, something calculated. If they had done this to others before, they wouldn't hesitate to do worse to me. I needed to be ready for anything, because this wasn't just about standing my ground. It was about exposing the truth, no matter the cost. The next morning, I stepped outside with a fresh determination burning in my chest. The tension between Tom and me had escalated past petty annoyances. It was war now. My cameras were set up, ready to capture any more of his antics, and I wasn't backing down. The neighborhood might have been used to rolling over for homeowner associations' corrupt games, but I was different. I was going to fight. As I walked towards my mailbox, I caught a glimpse of Tom across the street. He was leaning against his truck, casually flipping through his phone, acting like he hadn't turned my life into a living nightmare. I ignored him and pulled open the mailbox, already half expecting another fine or notice from Homeowner Association. Sure enough, a thick envelope bearing the Homeowner Association's insignia sat inside, waiting to ruin my morning. I tore it open and scanned the letter. Violation notice. The words practically screamed at me. I skimmed further down. Apparently, my lawn was not in compliance with community regulations. My lawn. The same lawn I had mowed 2 days ago. The same lawn that looked better than half the other yards on the street. Meanwhile, Tom's property resembled a frat house after a weekend bender, and Homeowner Association hadn't sent him so much as a warning. My blood boiled. I looked up and caught Tom watching me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Something wrong, neighbor?" he asked, his voice laced with mock concern. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself not to take the bait. "You know damn well what's wrong, Tom," I shot back. "This has your name all over it." He let out a dramatic sigh. "You think I control Homeowner Association? That's flattering, but you're giving me too much credit. Maybe they just don't like your attitude." I clenched the letter in my fist. This wasn't just about Homeowner Association's usual games. This was targeted harassment, plain and simple. I needed to do something. That night, I reviewed my security footage. I fast-forwarded through hours of nothing until something caught my eye. At around 2 a.m., Tom wandered onto my property. He stood in my yard for a while, looking around, then knelt down. I squinted at the screen, my heart pounding. He was ripping out chunks of my grass. He was actually damaging my lawn to make sure I got fined. My stomach twisted with anger. I rewound the footage, watching the scene again and again, each replay fueling my rage. The next morning, I marched straight to Homeowner Association's office, armed with my laptop and the video. The receptionist barely glanced at me before gesturing to the waiting area. I was prepared to sit there all day if I had to, but to my surprise, after 20 minutes, a voice called out my name. "Mr. Carter, you can come in now." I looked up to see Mr. Chandler, the Homeowner Association president, standing in the doorway of his office. I had spoken to him only a handful of times, and he always struck me as an overwhelmed man who had long since lost control of the organization he was supposed to run. I stepped inside and set my laptop on his desk. "I have evidence that Tom is deliberately damaging my property, and Homeowner Association is fining me for it," I said without preamble. Chandler blinked, clearly caught off guard. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation, it's fact," I countered. "I have video footage." I hit play. He watched in silence as the footage played out. Tom's smug face illuminated by the night vision camera as he destroyed my lawn. When the clip ended, Chandler exhaled sharply and leaned back in his chair. This shouldn't be happening. I wasn't aware of any of this. I frowned. "You run Homeowner Association. How do you not know what's going on?" He hesitated. "I handle policy, financials. Most of the reports and violations are processed through our accountant, Karen. She oversees compliance." "Karen." "Of course." My jaw tightened. "And I assume Karen is the one who decided my lawn was in violation." Chandler rubbed his temples. "It's possible." But look, Mr. Carter, I can't just revoke a violation on the spot. There's a process. A process, I scoffed. I have literal proof that Tom is setting me up, and you're telling me I have to wait on some bureaucratic process? He sighed again, clearly uncomfortable. I can look into it. That's all I can promise right now. I could see I wasn't going to get anything more from him today. But at least now I knew for certain that Karen was pulling the strings. She had turned homeowner association into her personal weapon, using it to target homeowners and push them out. As I walked out of the office, I felt Tom's game shifting. He wasn't just trying to annoy me anymore. He wanted me gone. And if I wasn't careful, he might actually succeed. After my meeting with Chandler, I knew I had to be careful. Karen had more influence in the homeowner association than I realized, and if she had been behind all these fines, then there was no telling what she would do next. I spent the rest of the day reviewing my security footage again, looking for anything I might have missed. I fast-forwarded through hours of footage, scanning for any unusual activity. And then I saw it. Tom, standing near my driveway, holding what looked like a can of paint. My blood ran cold as I hit play at normal speed. Tom glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then casually walked up to my fence. He unscrewed the lid, shook the can, and began flicking white paint onto the panels. The pattern was random, chaotic, just enough to make it look like vandalism rather than a direct attack. My jaw clenched as I watched him step back, admire his work, and then stroll back toward his house as if nothing had happened. The next morning, I woke up to a violation notice taped to my front door. The reason: defacement of community property, paint damage on exterior fencing. I gritted my teeth as I read the fine, $500 payable within 30 days. My hands shook with anger. Homeowner Association was fining me for damage that Tom had inflicted. This was beyond harassment. This was an organized takedown. I stormed over to Tom's house, pounding on the door so hard I thought it might crack. He opened it slowly, taking his time, a lazy grin already plastered across his face. "Well, good morning, neighbor. Something wrong?" I held up the violation notice, my hand shaking. "You did this. I have you on camera. You're caught." He leaned against the doorframe, completely unfazed. "Wow, you think I have time to go around painting fences? That's a wild accusation, buddy. Got any proof?" I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen to bring up the footage. "Right here, crystal clear. You, a can of paint, my fence. Try explaining this one." Tom watched for a second, then let out a short laugh. "Huh, yeah, that's weird. I could swear that's not me. But hey, you do what you gotta do. Homeowner associations got rules, man." I wanted to punch that smug expression off his face, but I took a deep breath instead. Violence wasn't the answer. Proof was. "I'm taking this to homeowner association," I said, my voice firm. "And this time, they're going to listen." I marched back into my house, gathered all my evidence, and drove straight to the homeowner association office. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew I had been set up again. Karen was already there, seated at the front desk, flipping through a stack of paperwork as if she had been expecting me. She barely glanced up as I approached. "Mr. Carter," she said smoothly, "another complaint?" I placed my laptop on the counter and opened the footage. "I have undeniable proof that Tom vandalized my property and homeowner association is fining me for it. Watch." Karen sighed, clearly bored, and leaned forward. The video played, showing Tom casually splattering paint across my fence. When it ended, she sat back folding her hands. "And how do I know this footage hasn't been altered?" My jaw dropped. "Are you kidding me? Why would I fake something like this?" She gave me a small, almost sympathetic smile. "Well, Mr. Carter, you've been quite vocal against the homeowner association lately. It wouldn't be the first time a homeowner has tried to stir up trouble." I stared at her, barely able to process the audacity. "So you're just going to ignore clear evidence?" She picked up the violation notice and slid it toward me. "Like I said, homeowner association has rules. If you want to dispute it, you'll need to go through the appeals process, and we both know how long that takes." Rage burned in my chest. Karen had rigged the system so perfectly that I didn't stand a chance if I played by her rules. I needed a new approach, something she wouldn't see coming. As I left the office, I made a decision. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to expose everything. Karen, Tom, the entire scheme, and I knew exactly where to start. If I was going to bring them down, I needed allies. And I had a feeling I wasn't the only homeowner in the neighborhood who had been targeted. I spent the next few days knocking on doors, talking to neighbors, listening to their stories. What I found out was worse than I had imagined. More than a handful of homeowners had received inexplicable fines, complaints they never filed, and violations that seemed to come out of nowhere. Some had even sold their homes at a loss just to get out. One elderly couple, the Hendersons, revealed that they had rented their house to Tom under Karen's recommendation. They had no idea he was using their home as a tool to drive neighbors out. When I told them what was happening, they were horrified. "We trusted her," Mrs. Henderson whispered. "She told us Tom was a great tenant." That night, I put together everything I had: the footage of Tom, the pattern of targeted fines, the stories of my neighbors. I sent it all to a local reporter, someone who had covered homeowner association corruption before. It was time to take this beyond community meetings and appeals. As I hit send, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Karen and Tom had been operating unchecked for too long. They thought they were untouchable, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. After collecting all the evidence and sending it to a local reporter, I expected things to settle down for a moment, maybe even see some hesitation from Karen and her little operation. But I underestimated just how deep this corruption ran. The next morning, I woke up to another fine taped to my door. This time, it was for excessive noise violations. I laughed bitterly. I'd spent the entire night inside, alone, reviewing footage and making notes. They weren't even trying to make the violations believable anymore. I took the paper inside and slammed it onto the counter, frustration boiling over. It was time to take action. I had spoken to enough neighbors to know I wasn't alone, and if Karen and Tom thought I was just going to accept my fate like the homeowners before me, they were sorely mistaken. I started with the Hendersons, the elderly couple who had unknowingly rented their home to Tom. They were horrified when I showed them what he had been up to. "We had no idea," Mrs. Henderson whispered, clutching her husband's arm. "We never would have agreed if we had known." I assured them that they weren't alone. "We can stop this, but we need more people to come forward. The more complaints we get documented, the harder it will be for them to ignore us." They agreed to speak to the reporter. That was the first win. But I needed more. Over the next 2 days, I knocked on doors, met with homeowners, and listened to their stories. Every single one of them had some kind of complaint against the homeowner association. Fines, harassment, bogus violations. Some of them were too scared to go against Karen and her allies, but others were angry enough to fight back. By the end of the week, I had compiled a list of over a dozen homeowners willing to testify against the homeowner association's corruption. That was when things started escalating. First, my mailbox disappeared. It wasn't knocked over. It was gone. Just a patch of dirt where it used to be. I reported it to the homeowner association, and their response was laughable. A missing mailbox is a homeowner's responsibility. Failure to replace it within 3 days will result in another violation. Then, my security cameras were tampered with. I woke up one morning to find 2 of them turned at odd angles, no longer covering my yard. Someone had physically moved them. I checked the footage, but there was nothing. Just a gap in the recording between 3 and 3:30 a.m. Someone knew exactly how to avoid being caught. I wasn't scared. I was furious. This had gone beyond petty fines. They were trying to intimidate me, trying to make me give up. But I had the neighborhood on my side now, and I wasn't backing down. The next homeowner association meeting was in 2 days, and I knew it was my best shot. I spent those 2 days preparing, gathering every document, every recording, and every statement from the neighbors who had agreed to stand with me. I even convinced the local reporter to attend. When the night of the meeting arrived, I walked into the homeowner association office with my laptop and a folder full of evidence, and for the first time, I wasn't alone. At least 15 other homeowners filed in behind me, taking their seats. Karen was already at the front, seated next to Chandler, who looked more nervous than usual. Tom was leaning against the wall in the back, arms crossed, watching me like a predator eyeing prey. Karen barely acknowledged me. "All right, let's begin. First item on the agenda, community maintenance fees." I stood up. "Actually, I have something to add to the agenda." She finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. "This isn't an open forum, Mr. Carter. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing." I smiled. I did submit them, multiple times, and they were ignored. But since we're all here, I figured I'd bring them up in person. I have undeniable proof that the homeowner association is engaged in fraudulent fines, targeted harassment, and illegal property manipulation, and I have more than enough witnesses to back it up. Karen's eyes darkened, but she kept her voice even. "Those are serious accusations. I hope you have evidence." I opened my laptop, connected it to the projector, and hit play. The footage of Tom vandalizing my fence played first. Then clips of my neighbors detailing their own experiences, screenshots of emails with ignored complaints, photos of tampered security cameras. And finally, a list of suspicious property sales over the last 5 years, all of which had been handled by Karen's hand-picked realtor. The room was silent. Even Chandler looked pale. Karen's mask of composure cracked just slightly. "This is all circumstantial," she said, but her voice wavered. "Then let's get the authorities involved and let them decide," I said, pulling out my phone. "Because I've already contacted a lawyer, and unless you want this to become a much bigger problem, I suggest you start explaining." Karen didn't respond. She knew the game was up. The reporter in the back of the room was already taking notes, and the other homeowners were watching, waiting. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about all of us. And we weren't going to let Karen win. The silence in the room was suffocating. The evidence was there, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Karen's expression had shifted from feigned indifference to something darker, calculation. She wasn't going to go down easily, and I knew that. But the other homeowners were watching. The reporter's pen was scratching against paper, and even Chandler looked like he had finally woken up from whatever daze Karen had kept him under. Karen cleared her throat and folded her hands on the table. "This is a gross misrepresentation of the facts," she said, her voice measured, trying to regain control. "The homeowner association operates within full compliance of community regulations. If any fines were issued incorrectly, we have an appeal process in place." I didn't let her continue. "And who runs that appeals process?" "You do, Karen. You process the fines. You decide which complaints get reviewed. You manipulate the system to benefit yourself and your little circle. We've got years of fake violations, fraudulent property transactions, and systematic harassment. You've driven people out of their homes, stolen their investments. It ends tonight." Murmurs spread through the crowd, some voices rising in agreement. A few of the homeowners who had been hesitant before were nodding now, realizing just how deep this ran. I could see the shift happening. Karen was losing control. Chandler finally found his voice. "Karen, I need you to explain these records," he said, his hands gripping the table, his face pale. "I signed off on a lot of these fines under your advisement. Are you telling me that I've been approving fraudulent charges?" Karen's lips thinned. "Of course not," she said smoothly. "These accusations are baseless. If any mistakes were made, they were clerical errors, nothing more. We should conduct a thorough review before jumping to conclusions." I scoffed. "You don't get to stall this time. The lawyer I contacted has already started reviewing these documents, and I bet the county's housing authority would be interested in a formal complaint." Her eyes flickered just for a moment, but I saw it. Fear. She knew she was cornered. Tom, who had been silent in the back, finally spoke. "This is ridiculous," he said, stepping forward, arms crossed. You're all just mad because I have a little fun. You can't handle it." I turned to him, my voice steady. "It's not about your parties, Tom. It's about the fact that you were placed here to drive people out. I have video footage of you vandalizing my property, and we've traced multiple forced sales back to your little harassment stunts. You're part of this." He snorted. "And what are you going to do about it?" "The police have already been notified," I said. "They're reviewing everything, and if there's a shred of justice in this town, you and Karen will be answering for this." That was when Karen lost it. "Enough!" she snapped, standing so abruptly her chair scraped against the floor. "This meeting is over. I won't sit here and be accused of crimes I didn't commit. If you want to pursue legal action, be my guest. But until then, you all are still bound by homeowner association regulations, and I suggest you remember that." But it was already too late. The shift had happened. The homeowners weren't afraid anymore. The lawyer I had contacted had just walked into the room. The reporter was already making calls. Chandler was demanding a full audit of every transaction under Karen's watch. Karen's face turned pale as she looked around the room. "You don't understand how these things work," she said, her voice faltering for the first time. "You think you can fight the system? I am the system." "Not anymore," I said. "You're done." Chandler exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. "Effective immediately. All homeowner association financial transactions will be frozen for audit," he announced. "Karen, I'm putting you on administrative leave until we sort this out." Karen's hands trembled slightly as she grabbed her folder. "This isn't over," she hissed. "No, it isn't," I agreed. "But this time, we're the ones in control." As Karen stormed out, Tom hesitated for a second before following her. But it didn't matter. Their time was up. The other homeowners were already talking amongst themselves, excited, relieved. The lawyer shook my hand, promising to dig deeper into every transaction. The reporter had more than enough material to publish a major exposé. As I left the meeting, I looked up at the sky. For the first time in months, I felt free. We had won the battle, but the war wasn't over yet. There were still legal hurdles ahead, but one thing was certain. Karen and Tom had underestimated us, and they had lost. The neighborhood belonged to the people again, and no corrupt homeowner association would ever take that away from us.